Dear friends, welcome again for a new series of programs called The Verdict of Science, Creation, hosted by Alpha Omega TV, Timișoara. Mr. John Mackay, International Director for Creation Research Australia, very glad to have you back again.
G'day Romulus, it's good to be back in the country.
Mr. Mackay, the news are just filled with shootings, killings, children are killing children, students are aiming their guns at teachers, at students. Can you please give us your insight?
Well, it is largely an American phenomenon still, although you're starting to see it happen in other countries. And because I do a lot of work in schools and educational institutions, we have bothered to try and find out what's going on behind the scene. It is interesting in the first of these, remember the massive Colorado one?
Yes,
the Columbine school killings?
Yes.
We've had a lot of time now to pick up data and even the tapes that the Sheriff's Office have released and played and that have left one point very, very pointed. These young men who did those killings, who dressed in black and went in and shot up all their school friends, basically had an atheistic, evolutionist mindset. So that, you know, one of them is on record as saying that such and such a person, look at the face evolution has given him, he deserves to be blown away. And so therefore there's no doubt about it that, like Stalin, this young man believed that we were just animals and, you know, life was all there was. So why not go out with a bang? If we came in with a big bang, then let's go out with a big bang. And he did. But of course the tragedy is, so did many of his school friends that he killed off with him. Now the second one, which has just occurred in, what is it, Red Lake, an Indian tribal county, we don't know a huge amount yet because the press hasn't, I guess you can say, delved into it. The Sheriff's Office hasn't released anything, so we don't know a huge amount of detail there. But having known one church which ministers to that tribal community, their interesting comment is there's a lot of spiritism there, a lot of occult. So if that's the case, then again you get a devaluation of human life, because, you know, the history of Europe tells us whenever you dabble in the occult, you get an increase in sacrifices, in sort of ceremonial killings. It's all part of the occult mentality. I suspect that what we're looking at in the whole of modern educational philosophy is the outworking of an anti-Christian, anti-creation, anti-God mentality about what man is. And in that case, man gets his value only because he's made in God's image. Strip that from society, then what is man? He's just an animal, he's just a thing, he can be disposed of, and in one way you'll go with evolution and the other way you'll go with the occult. The result's the same no matter what. I
just remember in the Columbine school, am I right, these young people, they aimed at guns at Christians willfully?
Yes,
I can recall some
there's certainly
discussion.
some of the students who were shot were Christians because they're on record as having given Christian testimonies both before that and on the day they were shot. And particularly their parents have come out afterwards and declared, you know, that my daughter is now with Christ in heaven, certain of that because of their Christian faith.
Just saying, this is just incidental that they shut down people praying. It was some kind of a prayer meeting going on. It's just coincidence, or it just comes in line with, I know it's kind of speculation, but I just want to get to the point of occultism has always something against Christianity. You mentioned this Indian tribal school. As I can recall correctly, this young man mentioned in his whatever leftovers that he had a high respect for Hitler. Hitler was all occult.
That's right.
So all things seem to be coming together.
They match together. And of course Hitler, of course, is basically evolutionary occult as well. And we don't know that about the young man at the moment, but given the nature of American education, the public schooling system is full of evolutionary philosophy, and it's no surprise that increasingly students dabble in the occult. And so yes, if they move into the occult, they will even if they don't do it consciously, become the enemies of Christianity. I mean, you've only got to look through the history of Europe, and my name being Mackay, my ancestors coming from Scotland, we were into the occult, right? And we killed people, we ate people, and particularly the missionaries, right? So therefore, it is only the coming of the gospel which puts a stop to that, but if you get back into the occult, you will automatically become the enemy of Christians.
Who are to be blamed? Governments are saying guns. Ban guns, got rid of the problem. What would you ban?
Well, it's true in the history of the world that a people really only gets the government which they deserve. It's a sad truth, but we tolerate governments instead of usually standing up for the truth. In the Western systems of democracy, the governments reflect the nature of the voting public. So if they put an anti-gun government in, it's because the people themselves already believe that the guns are the problem, right? In other words, they're shifting the blame. Now, I don't know about you, but it's very easy to look up the statistics in Europe or in Australia or in America and find out that more people are killed by cars than are killed by guns, right?
Ban cars.
But nobody bans cars, right? Because that's too convenient for us. But in a society which no longer hunts, it's very easy to blame the gun. But it's not the fault of the gun either. Right? Guns don't go around shooting people, right? Cars don't go around killing people. It's always the person behind the gun. It's not the bullet, it's not the gun, it's not the sale of the gun. There are plenty of places in America you can go and buy a gun over the counter, you know, even in a restaurant almost. So it's been a gun culture because only 200 years ago they were widely hunting their food. One of our friends in the USA, he's got a wall full of guns, right? And he still enjoys hunting. In Australia, we hunt a lot still. I've got kangaroos on my property, and if you're growing wheat and corn, that can be a little problem. So it's not the fault of the gun, but we are looking at a society which, having abandoned the belief that man is accountable, always tries to shift the problem somewhere else. I mean, the insurance company is built on this, isn't it? Get a policy which insures your car. Well, the car's not going to do anything, right? It's actually you who does the thing. But that's the way we've moved, to blame the thing instead of the person behind the thing. And it's again a non-creation based, it's an evolutionary base. And if you really want to know what the problem actually is, it's teaching man a wrong view of himself. So if you look at the difference, of course, if man evolved, then we're all part of a big social entity, and so the group is responsible, or the environment is responsible. If you get back and you teach man, no, God made man, we are made in his image, we are accountable to him, I pull the trigger of the gun, and therefore I do the killing. Therefore I'm responsible.
Interesting. We just mentioned children, students, guns. Aren't we lacking something, societies, aren't they lacking something like we would call a role model? I mean, we see young people dressed in black having a culture, a subculture, as a role model for their behavior. We see, if that is true, yet to be checked out, if this young man had Hitler as his role model, it's just all wrong. It's something, probably societies, which should be responsible to supply a decent role model for themselves, for their own sake, are they supplying such or not?
Well, having been involved in education over many, many years, it is interesting to note, and I'm sure you do the same here, the children learn to read. They have reading books with little stories in them. Well, you can get out, say in the English schooling system, the reading books from 1920, 1930, 1940, 1950, right up to 2005, right? And what you'll see is a change in the style of the heroes, right? So that in the 1800s, you will find, say in America, God and all the characters of the Bible are the heroes. You would find that here after the Reformation had occurred. God and the famous people in the Bible are the role models. By the time you get to the 1920s, 1930s, if you're in the English system, of course, then all the famous military leaders of England are the heroes. But basically, they're still a Christian mentality hero, okay? By the time you get to the 1950s, it's John Wayne with his gun, right? But still...
Guns again, guns again.
Still a God-fearing man. who was lamenting the passing of heroes, real heroes.
Yes.
Because in his mind, you killed the bad guys, and you didn't do it the bad way. And you weren't in bed with the bad guy's wife so you could find out how to kill him. By the time you get to the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, the good guys and the bad guys are hard to tell the difference, because the good guys are doing the same thing as the bad guys, they're just authorised by the government, okay? And so by the time you get to the 2000s, the good guys are into everything the bad guys are into, right? And so it's just decided by the fact that, well, the majority want the good guy type to win. And so majority becomes the definition of what's right and what's wrong. And so it is true that in education, what's happened has been the change, the heroes, the role models in the minds of the children. So if you read some of the newer educational courses, strong-minded warrior women, right, are the role models. And so then we wonder why 10 years down the track, the young girls and the young boys can't get married and make it last. Because they're both heads of the house, they're both fighting for the strong right, they both hold machine guns or rights to it in the army, and so there's no difference, and so that they can't make marriage work, and then they abandon it because they can't figure out what's wrong. So yes, what we've seen is a transition in role models, and again, it's largely due to where you believe you come from. I mean, the Greeks had it right when they said where we come from tells us who we are tells us where we're going to, and those are the three questions that govern most people's life. And if you get the answer to the first one wrong, if you think we've just evolved from the swamp, right, you get the answer to the second one wrong, because I'm just matter. And so you get the answer to the third one wrong. It doesn't matter if I take a 44 Magnum and blow Romulus Campan's head off. It would make good television. Okay?
At least for some people.
For some people, yes.
You just mentioned your involvement, your massive involvement in education. Okay? Having lectures, messages, debates in the public school system. You just came here from Manchester, and you had some lectures and some debates in the UK. Could you give us a couple of details of that?
Yes, we actually got invited to do a debate against the leading theistic evolutionist of the United Kingdom, Dr. John Polkinghorne, who's been a professor of physics at Cambridge, and that was at Liverpool Cathedral, and the place was packed. It was intriguing to see. Of course, that's going to be made available on DVD, so you can see who won or lost for yourself, right? And we had several requests to speak to groups like the Geological Association at St Andrews University, and it is intriguing to note that I guess you could say a measure of the success which I believe God has given us is that 20 years ago we would not have been invited to these places, because anybody who believed in creation then, as Darwin was reaching his zenith, right, the followers of Darwin would have been regarded as a fringe nut. Well, over the past 20 years, now you get requests to speak to these places, right, and to debate this. So that is very encouraging to me. And so I'm hoping that in education we can progressively now see the pushing back of the strength of evolution and the re-establishment of the truth that creation is not just a blind belief, it's a fact of nature, it's a fact of reality.
We both know that all statements, all ideas that are rounded and well thought, they should have a key word or a short key statement. Why is a country's educational structure, or a part of it, inviting someone like you to do a debate? It's interesting.
Well, sometimes the reason varies around the different countries, so that I do a lot of work, say, in Canada, where there's been an awful lot of Islamics move, right? So I get invited into the public education system there, not primarily because the teachers are interested in creation, but because they're scared stiff of the Islamics, who are totally anti-evolution. And I have to say, oh, that the Christians were strong in their beliefs that the teachers were afraid of the Christians too. But nevertheless, the result's the same. I can go in and talk about the evidence against evolution and for creation, so I'm pleased with the result. When you go to places like England, which of course is where Darwin came from and where evolution had its first and biggest impact, it is intriguing to be invited to speak to these places. And I guess you can say one reason for it is we've now gone through Darwin's theory of natural selection and found it didn't work. Okay, we're now 150 years after Darwin. We've gone through his version, we've gone through the neo-Darwinist school, natural selection plus mutation, and we've shot bacteria full of chemicals and x-rays, and we've managed to turn them into bacteria. So natural selection plus mutation actually doesn't work. We've now moved on to punctuated equilibrium. You know, the idea that once the creatures appear, they are inherently stable. But the minute you move to that, you're just admitting that nothing is evolving. And all of a sudden, if nothing is evolving, what are we studying this for, please, Professor? And so, therefore, it is very evident that something's wrong somewhere. Now, the evolutionist may not admit that he's got the whole picture wrong. He actually wants to keep the picture of evolution, but it's at least getting to the stage where students are saying, well, if you can't answer my questions, Professor, I'm going to invite Mr. Mackay of Creation Research in to talk to our Association of Geology, and you're welcome to come along. And that is happening more and more, which is great.
Great. Something is rotten in Denmark was the line of Shakespeare?
That is correct, yeah, Hamlet, I believe.
Let me ask you one thing. If an invitation goes somewhere, goes out of some sort of need, isn't it possible that the educational system just has a sense of a smell of something rotten in their own system, and they're just crying out that it looks great to have an invitation or request to do that? Is there some sort of need in the background felt by those in charge with our educational systems?
Well, if you read your ancient Greek philosophy, one of their philosophers said, governments love reorganization because it gives the illusion of progress. All right, now, if you look at education in the West, in the East, for the past 100 years, you've had new schemes, new syllabuses, new curriculums, right? And really, the reason they're coming up with these new curriculum, new scheme, is not that we've discovered anything new, it's just that they've lost confidence in the last version of it. So somebody gets a PhD and gets a government grant, and we do a new version, which in 10 years proves to be just as ridiculous. Now, you've only got to do this 2 or 3 times before you begin to say, do they really know what they're talking about? Or is something wrong in the state of Denmark? And you've hit it on the head. Something is wrong. The whole attitude of many educators to students is a victim of Charles Darwin's evolutionary philosophy, so that if you believe the environment has developed us, then how do you discipline students? Well, you give them new carpets, you give them new desks, you give them new books, because it's the environment that determines. That's why they were so badly behaved. They didn't have the environment which made them better. Of course, the fact is we've given them new carpets, we've given them new books, we've given them new rooms, and they've graffitied all over the walls and they've ripped up the carpets, right? So therefore it is not the environment which is the cause, the result is the consequence. The cause, of course, is, as the biblical picture of creation says, man was made in God's image, right? So therefore we're pretty smart, right? But the problem is we chose to use our wits, our brains, our intelligence to rebel against our Creator, and the problem is therefore in us. It's not in this desk, it's in us. And if you're an educator, that needs to be your starting point. I have 50 students, 30 students, 1,000 students in front of me, and every one of them has a problem inside. I can't fix it by altering the environment outside. So even our prison systems would say, give him 20 years in the penitentiary and we'll change him into a new man. No, you won't change him into a new man unless the inside is changed.
We have voices saying that our public school system, I'm not talking about secular public school, but publicly available school system, like Christian school system, it proves to be best. We have a strong, and we can prove that, very well-working homeschooling movement in the United States. If a young couple with children would have this choice, what would be the best? I'm not asking you to say, well, this is the best option, but for the given society, what should we look at? Or maybe we should look at the core of what is being taught there.
I've just come from England, and of course part of the education system there is Tony Blair, even though he's on the Labour side of, you know, the centre, as it were, has opened up a real can of worms with his favouring of what he calls his faith schools, where, yes, you can have these private schools, which are now, most of them, moving back towards a Christian basis. Okay, now, I made a point before that the teacher teaches the student he recognises in front of him depending on where he thinks the student came from. Is he an animal, or is he a degeneration of God's creation? What is he? Is he on the way up, or is he on the way down? Take your pick. When you have parents trying to decide about education, there's really a couple of things that people need to know. Number one, I'm looking at Romulus Campaign, and his IQ has not changed from the day he was conceived as a little cell in his mother's womb, right? It's embedded in your DNA, right? So schools do not improve a student's intelligence quota. He is born as smart as he's ever going to get. What they do is they either enable that to be expressed or they suppress it, right? In the case of the first one, if you want to enable it to be expressed, you will give the student the opportunity to learn. How does a student learn? Well, the information is not on the inside, the machinery is on the inside. The information is on the outside, so you need a good way to get that information into the student. Now, one reason why homeschooling has become incredibly popular in the USA, and it really is on the increase in the UK, almost to the point where it's threatening the government subsidies of public education, and the public school teachers know this, right? Why have they done this? Number one, because they see the public schooling system as expressing the theory of evolution, and that results in a drop in standards because we're on the way up, right? We're going to make it. The environment is the determiner, so therefore all of the old restraints about hitting a child or disciplining a child to cope with the sin within have been withdrawn. So as you know from reading newspapers, the behaviour in public educational schools has become a nightmare, right? Yes. You can't discipline kids for alcohol or drugs, or you know, you have to give them social counselling and all that. You have to take all sorts of people.
We can't even tell parents that they're taking drugs somehow.
No, you can't do that, and you can't tell them they're wrong, right? The worst you can do is tell them it's socially unacceptable, right? So the students will grow up having no concept of right and wrong, and it reflects in their behaviour at school, at home, and they become unmanageable. So many parents are pulling their students out because of that reason. And really what they're doing is reverting to the old system we had, say, in Europe, when you had somebody who had enough money to afford a tutor. But in this case, they don't have enough money, so mum or dad becomes the tutor. Nothing wrong with that in principle. But if mum and dad doesn't have the information available to them, it will never get to the students, right? So therefore, I guess you could say the homeschooling movement in the USA is moving halfway back to the old organised educational system where a community, particularly a church community, would sum together enough money to pay a learned tutor to actually teach their children within a Christian framework, so that the tutor was authorised to discipline the kids, because these children actually were little sinners, right? And they needed to be saved, sanctified, turned into saints, right? So therefore, the whole discipline system, the traditional European discipline system, the traditional American one, has had a Christian worldview, which has been a creation basis. So that's a little bit of the background. It's not the method itself which is the problem, but the philosophy which goes behind it. I've had homeschoolers in the USA who've basically pulled their kids out of the public education system because they didn't want the public education system to influence them. The trouble was, they really didn't want anybody else to influence them. So those kids are some of the worst students I've ever come across, because mum and dad, well, they had no discipline, they couldn't stand authority, so they had utterly the wrong reason for trying to educate these kids themselves, and that is doomed for disaster.
www.creationresearch.net. Is there any source of information?
Yes, you will find there's lots of resources there. In fact, you receive our regular email newsletter, don't you? Every couple of weeks.
Yes, I do.
We send out the latest scientific information in words that the majority of lay people have no problem understanding, along with a creation, Christian-based comment. And of course it reports on all of our debates, and if you want to know when you can get the DVD copy of the debate against John Polkinghorne, I've actually seen the master now, and it's good. So there's lots of resources there, and if people have got questions, just click on the search engine, and there's lots of information stored in there about all these subjects, and it's free.
If anyone wants any information, it's just, as I can remember, info@creationresearch.net, and
that will get to the
get
right
the answer,
person.
get the right information. Very good.
But that's on the website too, so you better give them the website again.
Yes, we will do that. So www.creationresearch.net. Mr. Mackay, at the end of our program, we have 1 or 2 minutes more. What is education? Wrap up.
What is education? To take out of somebody and give to somebody else. Right, the state of being informed. You will find, therefore, in your biblical picture, there is always a teacher and there are those who are learners, right? And if students themselves don't know or appreciate that this information is coming from higher to lower, or the teacher himself or herself does not appreciate that wisdom actually is needed to understand information, to turn it into useful educational stuff, the whole thing falls apart. So it is a pyramid. God at the top, teachers, parents next, and students down there, so that they can move up that pile.
Dear friends, remember the Sermon on the Mount, the Savior talking to people, the Savior educating people, the great teacher talking to his future students. This is why we do believe education is so important. This is why education is important. Thank you so much for being with us today. We are truly awaiting you for another session of the Verdicts of Science Creation. Have a blessed time with the Lord and with one another.